Welcome to the Workplace Minute, powered by H3HR Advisors and sponsored by WorkHuman. Thanks for joining me for your quick briefing on what's important in the world of work. My name's Steve Boese. Today in the show, we're taking a look at the real-world impacts of what's happening inside plants, hotels, warehouses, and farm fields when federal agents arrive and what it means for workers, operations, and HR leaders. Let's break it down. First, the landscape. In 2021, the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, announced it would shift away from high-profile mass raids, focusing instead on unscrupulous employers and partnering with the Labor Department to safeguard whistleblowers. That memo reset expectations for HR teams. Fast forward to 2025, and we're seeing a renewed emphasis on worksite enforcement actions, with senior officials signaling more employer-focused investigations and on-site operations ahead. Employment law advisories and immigration and customs enforcement releases have been warning employers to expect increased audits and visits this year. And that's an unmistakable change in approach that HR leaders should treat as a real operational risk. So what's been happening on the ground? In early September, federal agents executed a large operation at a Georgia battery plant tied to Hyundai's U.S. electric vehicle supply chain, detaining roughly 475 workers in what was described as the largest single-site worksite action in DHS history. The ripple effects reached far beyond the factory floor, prompting diplomatic concern from Seoul and immediate staffing disruptions for the facility's partners. Officials have since stated more business-targeted operations are coming. And it's not just at corporate megasites. Days later in upstate New York, agents detained dozens at a 230-employee snack bar factory, with local officials and the company describing a sudden halt in production and significant family and community disruption. Workers reported being pulled into a lunchroom and asked for proof of their status, with many parents unable to reach their children during the hours-long actions. The incident shows how even a single mid-sized facility can be thrown offline in just a matter of hours. So what industries are the most exposed? Well, think of sectors with historically high shares of unauthorized labor and ongoing tight labor markets: agriculture, food processing, hospitality, construction, and parts of manufacturing and logistics. Analyses this summer highlighted how states and industries that rely more heavily on undocumented workers are already seeing slower employment growth, especially in hospitality and construction, when these enforcement actions rise. And for agriculture specifically, producers have reported crop losses and stalled harvests when workers stay home or are detained. So what does this mean for worker behavior? Well, fear and uncertainty aren't limited to just undocumented workers. Mixed status households and even work-authorized employees have reported staying at home on rumored raid days, avoiding commuting and skipping children taking to daycare. Business press accounts from early 2025 documented near-halted harvests in California's Central Valley when picking crews didn't show up and managers scrambling to reshuffle shifts to keep essential lines running. And the absenteeism effect is real and immediate, even when no enforcement action actually occurs on a given day. And the human impact is pretty profound. Detained workers face separation from families and children and sudden loss of income. And those workers left behind shoulder longer shifts, mandatory overtime, and emotional strain, especially when their teammates disappear overnight. Research also suggests community-level spillover. Immigration enforcement operations have been linked to spikes in absenteeism and other issues that depress school and neighborhood stability, signals HR will recognize as predictors of workforce churn. And operationally, the hit can be severe. Facilities report immediate slowdowns or stoppages, missed customer commitments, falling quality, safety risks. All of these things happen when experienced crews are reduced. In food and agriculture, time-sensitive harvest windows close up. In manufacturing, specialized lines can't be staffed on short notice. In services, front-of-house gaps dent revenue and employer brand. And recent ICE briefings have also emphasized identity fraud findings during operations, which trigger follow-on re-verifications and add months of compliance headaches. So what should HR leaders do right now, practically, before, during, and after these actions? Well, before any immigration enforcement action occurs, experts recommend the following. First, tighten up your I-9s. Conduct attorney-supervised internal audits, fix technical errors, ensure consistent re-verification processes, And don't selectively re-verify based on just rumors. Follow your handbook, follow your policies, and document the training for anyone who's involved in the hiring process. Next, scenario plan. Identify roles with single points of failure in your process. Cross-train, negotiate overtime and shift premiums, voluntary standby or on-call lists, and line up other staffing partners in case of shortages. Next, worker communications. Provide neutral, rights-aware information, like how to designate emergency contacts, how pay and benefits will be handled if someone is detained, what documents are needed for I-9s, and emphasize support and non-retaliation. And finally, vendor diligence. In higher risk sectors, make sure your contractor's compliance and indemnification clauses are in order. And if you use staffing agencies, make sure you check on their onboarding and e-verify practices. So if indeed ICE or DHS show up at your workplace to conduct an action, some recommendations include follow your playbook. Designate a trained point person to interact with the agents, ask to see warrants and the scope of the warrants, cooperate without volunteering records beyond what's requested, and keep your outside counsel in the loop. For safety and continuity, you need to stabilize your operations. Pause manufacturing lines if needed, reassign people, activate relief crews, and just make sure you're not running into safety incidents. Finally, keep people first. Offer immediate support to affected families, your EAP program, childcare referrals, transportation if needed. Keep your communications factual and calm, and avoid amplifying rumors. And finally, after an immigration enforcement action has occurred in your workplace, other steps should be undertaken, like compliance remediation. If identity fraud or paperwork issues were uncovered, you need to execute a standardized, non-discriminatory correction path with your counsel. Update your policies and training based on the lessons learned. You need to stabilize the workforce. You may need to rebalance workloads. Keep an eye for mandatory overtime. Bring in support where needed to prevent burnout among your remaining staff. In the community and to manage your reputation, you should engage proactively with local officials and community partners. Work with your customers about service impacts and recovery strategies. And finally, for chronic exposure, make sure you revisit things like your workforce strategy, your skills pipelines, other channels to find labor where applicable, and just make sure that you are standing up for your people who are impacted both before, during, and after these actions. Bottom line, the worksite enforcement is once again a material operating risk across many parts of the U.S. economy. These costs show up in people, production, and PR, often overnight. HR leaders who treat this as an enterprise risk with clear pre-planning, policy review, and updates and humane response protocols will help protect both their people and their business when and not if these pressures reach their doorstep. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening, and a big thank you to WorkHuman for supporting the Workplace Minute. If this episode made you think about how your organization is balancing compliance with people-first practices, please share it with a colleague. I'm Steve Boese, and this has been the Workplace Minute from H3 HR Advisors.